A lot of us have stories, experiences, maybe even teachings and philosophies about suffering that we're accustomed to, and it shapes how we perceive the topic of suffering, the big topic. And we just saw, just by the 5 seconds we took at each table, there was so much more, right? Each table had individually like 15 minutes of discussion, but just in the 5 seconds we saw a broad spectrum of thoughts and understandings about the topic of suffering. In addition to our own experiences, and there are things that we know, there are literally hundreds of books on the topic of suffering. Go to any bookstore, you'll find books on suffering. You go to any Christian bookstore, and there's probably even more. There are additionally tons of passages in the Bible we could go to, and you guys were able to show that by the many passages that you brought up just during your table time there. And I would I would suggest that many of you probably even have scriptures about suffering that you've memorized. Maybe something that you kind of go to as your default when times get tough. Things that you find comfort in. Maybe it isn't a psalm, or maybe it's something that Paul said or Jesus said that just kind of brings your heart comfort in the middle of suffering. But the story that I want to look at today, and recognizing that there are a lot of other ones we could go to, is found in John chapter 9. John chapter 9, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 7. We're going to look first at just these first couple of verses here, and then we're going to actually focus in on the last couple. But it says this in John chapter 9, 1 through 7. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Let's focus in on the first few verses that we've just read. The first thing that it says is that they passed by and saw a man blind from birth. This dude was born blind. Not he had been blind for a little bit of time. Not that he couldn't see as well as he once could. You know, they didn't have glasses the same way we do now, right? So, you know, he couldn't take a glass bottle. They only had pottery. It just blocked his vision. No, it wasn't any of that. It wasn't that he'd had an accident recently and now he was blind. No, he was born this way. Born blind. And we know from later in the chapter, you can check me up on this if you'd like, but this person was not particularly young. Others knew him as a regular beggar. He was well known, so he'd been there for a while. And when when the Pharisees talked to his parents, they referenced the fact that he is of age, meaning he's an adult. He can answer for himself. He doesn't need us to answer for him. So this guy wasn't particularly young. And the bottom line is, he'd been blind for a while. And so what do Jesus' disciples do when they see this man that was born blind? They do what most of us would do, and they assume that someone must have done something to deserve this plight. They say, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents?" And this makes tons of sense. If you're looking at that going, "Well, that's kind of a weird question." No, it's really not. Think about it. If you knew someone was blind, you would assume that something had happened. Especially if they were born blind. You might think that maybe their mother was on drugs, and so there was a deformity. Or maybe you think that their father was abusive. Or maybe God knew that if this person was born with sight, they would do irreparable damage to the world. But our natural inclination is to assume that if things go wrong, there is a reason. And usually, we like to believe that that person kind of had it coming. We like to ask the question, who's at fault? Now, the problem is that this line of thinking assumes that people who are born blind are worse sinners than people who aren't. And when you think about it from that perspective, now it starts to sound a little bit silly. Because we know that they're not worse sinners. And if we thought that, then what does that make us? That makes us self-righteous. When we put ourselves in this position, we get to be self-righteous, especially if we are not the one that happened to be born blind. If we happen to be the one that was born with all of our limbs and in good working order, and the other guy has some weird deformity, we're like, oh, God must love me just a little bit more. That line of thinking assumes that people of a tough time must somehow deserve it. It assumes that what we can see is all there is to see. And that line of reasoning, whether we want to admit it or not, is one that we all often carry right up until we are the ones experiencing the suffering. And we're not super interested in thinking of ourselves as a worse sinner than everyone else, or as ourselves as the one that had this coming, or ourselves that must have done something to deserve this. And that's really the whole point of the story of Job. One of the tables brought up Job, and they said, Job, Job is all about suffering. And that was really the point of the book, because both Job and his friends believed the same basic human belief, and that is, if you're suffering, there's a reason for it. The only difference between Job and his friends is that Job's friends said, you must have done something wrong, and that's why this is happening to you. And Job said, I haven't done anything wrong. There's no reason for this to be happening to me. They were both coming at it from the same perspective. One was just coming at it from the, serves you right, and the other was like, no, it doesn't. I swear, I didn't do anything. I've done the best I can. And at the end of Job, if you've ever read the entire book of Job, at the end of Job, God clarifies and says, you guys are all a bunch of morons. You're asking the wrong questions. Who are you to question why I do what I do? Were you there when I created the earth? Do you understand the strength of a horse? Do you understand the great beasts of the depths of the sea? Do you really get anything? And you're trying to figure out your circumstances? Now, when Job says he's innocent, and when God says you didn't necessarily deserve this, there's a point of clarification we can make, and that is that there is none righteous. I'm not up here telling you today that you're righteous outside of Jesus, okay? That's not the point that we're trying to make. Earthly suffering, however, does not necessarily have anything to do with one standing before God. Let's just be honest. There are people that are condemned to an eternity separated from God that in this earth are just fine. Living a great life, have no physical problems, mentally stable, great job, beautiful or handsome spouse, and they're as lost as they can be. And there are some other people in this world that have a deep and abiding and intimate relationship with Jesus, and they're going through it. They're struggling. They've dealt with hardship that you and I can only imagine, and probably don't want to imagine. And so I would like to start by saying, well, I am not saying we are inherently righteous. We're all inherently sinful. We all lack righteous standing before God outside of Jesus. Suffering does not necessarily have anything to do with that. And Jesus says that. It wasn't this man or his parents that sinned, but this was done that the works of God might be displayed in him. Again, Jesus is not teaching that this man or his parents were perfect, but he is clarifying that the blindness had nothing to do with what he or his parents did. He doesn't leave it there. He doesn't just say the blindness was bad luck or just hard for this life. Sin entered the world and now we deal with hard things. No, he actually takes it one step further. He says that the blindness was designed for God's glory. Now that is downright crazy. That's tough. I mean, if it's not happening to us, maybe we see it as less crazy because, it's really easy to find somebody else that's suffering and be like, God always has a plan. Okay? God just wants what's best for you, so it must be. And if you've ever been going through something, someone said something absolutely idiotic like that to you, you wanted to do nothing else but punch them in the face. But if this was you or me, if we were the ones born blind, and someone said, no one did anything wrong, this was just so God would be glorified. Again, we would want to punch them in the face. Some of you have gone through some really hard stuff. I don't know your individual stories, but I know if you're part of the human race, you have gone through some hard stuff. And I would be willing to bet that someone during your hard stuff times did something or said something like what I just suggested. Maybe they came up to you and with all love, they weren't trying to be a jerk, but with all love said, God is always in control. And we just have to abide in that faith. Or maybe this is my favorite. Maybe they walked up and they said, I fear you're going through a tough time, and I just want to declare victory in this situation. Or maybe they decided to quote Romans 8:28, for we know that all things work together for good to those who love God. You do love God, right? You're not away from God right now. Or my favorite. They tell you they know exactly how you feel and then proceed to tell you a story about their life that is nothing like what you're going through. Those are all bad enough. Those are all it's like, come on, people, this is not helping. But imagine someone saying, I know you didn't do anything to deserve this, so it must be for God's glory. And that's tough. And yet that's what Jesus is saying, and quite honestly, that's what I'm going to be presenting to you this morning. One of the most famous, and I would suggest worst books on the topic of suffering is the New York Times best-selling book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? By David Arnold. The foreword was written by Harold Kushner. Or no, sorry, Harold Kushner. I forget. It's a Jewish rabbi. That basically, in this book, the author asks a very simple question. He basically says, how can a God who is both good and all-powerful allow bad things to happen? And he then suggests the idea that either God is not good or he is not all-powerful, because if he is good and he's allowing bad things to happen, then he can't be all-powerful. And if he's all-powerful but he's allowing bad things to happen, then he must not be good. That's the conclusion the author draws. I will save you 4 or 5 hours of wasted time by telling you that Mr. Arnold decides that God is good but he's not powerful. That's the conclusion the book reaches, is that God is a good God, he's not powerful, he can't actually do anything about our situation, so he simply is there for us to complain to and to vent to. Now, if you want to discuss that line of reasoning more, I would be happy to take you to lunch sometime and we can have a whole conversation about the book and about this theory. But I would suggest, for the purposes of this class, that this book is asking the wrong question. The question the book asks is, why do bad things happen to good people? But the question is not, why do bad things happen to good people? The question is, why do good things happen to bad people? Because spiritually speaking, we're all bad people. And so we're starting from a mixed up premise. And so if you don't believe that, if you don't believe we're all inherently bad people, I would encourage you to check out Psalm 14, Romans 3, Romans 6, and the rest of the Bible. But while the better question is contrasted with David Arnold's book, with why do good things happen to bad people, what we really want to know is not why do bad things happen to good people. What we really want to know is, can there be purpose amid my suffering? good, bad, or indifferent, if I have a relationship with God and Jesus, I am classified as righteous. Now I'm a good person. Not because of anything in me, but because of Jesus in me. If I'm outside of a relationship with God, I'm classified as a bad person. But yet, at the same time, the people that are outside a relationship with God don't always experience the suffering. The people that do have a relationship with God don't always experience bliss. And therefore, can there be purpose amid that suffering? When my heart is broken, when my health is challenged, when my job is taken, when I flunk school, when something terrible happens, is there purpose? Does God have a purpose in and for my suffering? Or the real question that we all ask in our heart of hearts when we suffer, why is God letting this happen to me? It's a real question. I mean, that's I'm just trying to be real with you guys. That's a real why is God letting this happen? And especially if you're like active in church, I can't tell you how many people have come to me like, John, I go to church every week. I put a little money in when I can. I read my Bible. I'm trying to pray. What's God doing? Why did he take my girl? Why did I just find out that I've got leukemia? Why did he take my child? Why? Does God have a purpose? And to help answer that question in a real way from our original text, I'd like to try to play a short video for you. Do we have the sound set up, guys? We're going to try to play a short video for you from somebody that I think has a whole lot more credibility than I do.
Oh, this one.
Should be sound. Sound?
Nope, nothing.
Oh, hang on. I know why. Hang on, guys. Go back. I know why. My own setting. I made sure their settings were right. Never forgot to look at my own. Isn't that the way life goes? We're always looking at everybody else to fix things and forget to look at our own hearts. Let's try this again.
I was born.
Oh. Come on. We're going to get this to work. There we go.
I was born in Melbourne, Australia, 1982, and my parents had no idea that I was going to be born without arms or legs. I was the only one that I ever saw without limbs. My faith in Jesus Christ was sealed after 7 years of wondering why, God, I was born this way. And you answered me very clearly through John chapter 9. And I gave my life to Jesus at 15 after reading about how he came across a man who was born blind. And I'm like, hey, hold on a second. This was interesting. And no one knew why he was born that way. I'm like, perfect. So I read on, and in verse 3 of the 9th chapter, Jesus said it was done so that the works of God would be revealed through him. And I'm like, wow, God, if you had a plan for the blind man, you do have a plan for me. And that was the beginning of my personal relationship with Jesus. Youth groups were starting to call me, churches were starting to call me, opportunities were opening up everywhere for me to share my testimony. I was speaking in front of 300 sophomore public high school students. 3 minutes into it, half the girls were crying. One girl in the middle of the room started weeping. She put up her hand and she said, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can I come up there and give you a hug? In front of everyone, she came and she hugged me. She cried on my shoulder and whispered in my ear, no one's ever told me that they love me. No one's ever told me that I'm beautiful the way that I am. I couldn't believe it. It changed my life. That was when I knew I was called to be a worldwide evangelist. of God, we have seen face to face 500,000 souls say yes to Jesus and be plugged in.
Finishes up by saying into the local church. It's one thing for me to tell you that God has a purpose for your suffering. Sure, I've gone through some hard stuff, but some, or most, or all, would say that I did deserve it. But when you get to see a man like Nick who can apply a passage like this to his life and be used by God to reach millions, that is when things, I think, get a little bit more real. You see, in the story of the blind man, God's glory was found in his healing. The Bible records that having said these things, Jesus spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, he anointed the man's eyes, told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. He went and washed and came back seeing. But in the life of Nick, God's glory has not been to give him his arms and legs. That was how Nick interpreted these verses for a long time. If you listen to Nick's full testimony, you'll hear him say that for years he was praying for the miracle of having arms and legs, especially as a young man. Can you imagine being 8, 9, 10 years old, being 13, 15, 18 years old and not having limbs? And he clung to these verses for a long time, expecting that God was going to grant his prayer to have limbs. But eventually he realized that the purpose for his situation was not in the miracle, but rather in people being brought to Jesus. The Apostle Paul also had to reach this conclusion. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, he says, to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelation, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me and keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. We don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was, although there are many people that believe that his thorn in the flesh was similar to the blind man, and they believe that Paul had poor sight. They get that from the fact that whenever he signed his letters, he had to use very large letters because he couldn't see them very well. We don't know. We really don't know. And it ultimately doesn't matter. Whatever that thorn was, the great Apostle Paul, the one who was used by God to write a third of the New Testament, the one who was used by God to heal many other people, was not given the opportunity to have his suffering alleviated. But it was still used for the glory of God. My friends, whatever you're going through, whatever you have been through, whatever you will go through, the purpose is that the works of God might be displayed in you. The purpose is that the works of God might be displayed in you. Purpose is greater than our experience. Purpose has an eternal impact. When I was first introduced to the idea of God's bigger purpose, my grandmother used a needlepoint illustration. How many of you in here know what needlepoint is? All right, for 2 of you, this is going to make sense. Whenever you needlepoint, you basically take thread and you put it through a piece of cloth that looks like this. Kind of a gridded out piece of cloth. And after you put this different threads, a million different threads in a million different places, it looks like that on the backside. And this is what the project looks like on one side of the needlepoint. But this is the mortal view. This is what our view in light of eternity often looks like. We're like the thread in this project. And it doesn't make any sense where we are, and we're all tied up. And we look at the terrible threads that we're stuck with. I mean, ugh, that orange. But if we could see the designer's view, if we could see the artist's view, if we could see the pattern, we would see the front. And we would realize that it all makes sense. Each thread has a purpose. Each placement is perfect. And each move was for the glory of the artist. Ladies and gentlemen, you are a beautiful tapestry. The book of Psalms says you were knit together in your mother's womb. God has not lost control. God is not worried about the outcome. And unless God's glory is being revealed by a place of maybe repentance as you get closer to Him and step outside of maybe things that are inherently bringing a curse, it may not have anything to do with what you've done. The purpose in our suffering is found in the confidence that God is using every moment to bring us and others into more intimate relationship with Him. Whether you have been born with something that has made every day of your life hard, or you've experienced something in life that was just devastating when it happened, or you are currently navigating the troubled waters of suffering and are just wondering, when will this end? I hope that each of us knows that there is purpose in our suffering. And we may not understand what is happening in that moment, but we will. There will come a day, there's this table here that brought up Revelation. There will come a day when every tear will be wiped from every eye and everything will be made new. There's an old Southern gospel song that says, we'll know more about it by and by. I want to share just two thoughts with you as we close. The book of Job has been debated for many years, and we don't have time to discuss that whole book. We talked about it a little bit earlier. But we mentioned earlier the fact that they came from the same position. They were coming from the idea that if something was going wrong, somebody did something to deserve it. And God comes in and says, who are you to allege anything? You're not the ones in control. You didn't create the earth. You're not sustaining the heavenly bodies. They were mere mortals that had a limited perspective, and therefore they had no right to question God. But what the book of Job really says to us is that we don't have the whole picture. But we have a God that does. We have a God that has everything work together. And it might be cliche in the midst of your difficulty when someone says, but all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to His purpose. And while that is cliche, and I don't recommend any of you tell that to anyone when they're having a difficult time, it is the truth when you're having a difficult time. It is something you can depend on. It is something that you can rest in. And it's something that hopefully, many of you might have even already experienced this, where you're going through something and then you kind of get a little further down the road of life and you look back at that horrible, terrible, rotten, difficult experience and go, all right, God, I get it now. That was used for your glory. That was used for my benefit. You didn't hate me. You were loving on me. You were loving on other people. Nick says in a different video, he says, if he can not have his arms and legs back and see one more person come to Jesus, it's all worth it. That's a hard place to be. I've been in a position where I kind of had to come to terms with, okay, God, if one more person comes to you, it's okay to continue in this situation. That's where we're called to be. I get it, it's tough. I'm not expecting it because I say it. You guys are all like, oh, cool, I have all the solutions to all my problems now. It's harder to live out than it is to talk about, for sure. But there's a second thing as well. The second thing I want to share with you is that we might just understand more than we think we do. That's right, we might understand more than we think we do. Because it's not just in spiritual matters that suffering has purpose. I would submit for your consideration that in every area of life, it is hardship that produces positive results. And I can think of no better opportunity as an example of this just very real truth than in areas that I think everyone in here can understand, and that is education and exercise. Many of you are in the process of some form of education, whether that's in university or you're learning a new career, a new trade of some sort. You're growing, you're learning. Every day is a learning opportunity. And if you are in the process of learning, you know that it takes work. You are not going to learn effectively without discipline. We would not expect that if we neglect class, don't do our homework, don't do our assignments, don't practice what the boss gives us, stop doing what we're supposed to be doing at work, that we're going to get better at what we want to do. Just not how it works. Many of us also engage in some form of regular exercise. And you know that you are not going to get strong sitting on the couch, binging Netflix, eating potato chips. I get it. We all want to do that. It's comfortable. But the suffering of the workout, the tearing of the muscles, is what makes us stronger. It's what makes us more physically fit. I submit for your consideration that God is doing what needs to be done in our lives to achieve those same types of results. Think of yourself as the muscle that just got shredded, lifting way more weight than you wanted to lift today. Think of yourself as the brain that is tired, the eyes that are weary, the body that is dragging after a hard day of work or after a long night of study. You know it's for the greater good because you're making your eyes stay open. Like using clamps. Read the book. You might be reminding yourself of the bills you have to pay as you work. Must keep working. Must. But you know it's for the good. Your body is not happy. Your body's upset. Your body is crying. Your eyes are sleepy. Your brain is tired. Your body just wants to lay down. And you're saying, no, you're going to do more because more is better in the long run. I think the same thing happens to us spiritually. One more verse before we go. Somebody, I think, already brought this up at one of the tables. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 16 says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifest, that means shown forth, in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you, since we have the same spirit of faith according to what has been written. I believe and so spoke. We also believe, and so we also speak, knowing that he who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and bring us with you into his presence. For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God." And check out the last two verses of this chapter. "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day, for this light, momentary affliction," I know it doesn't feel like that, but that's what it is in the big picture, "is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things which are seen, but to the things which are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Can we pray together? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for having just a great and amazing and wonderful plan for our lives. Thank you for giving us the capacity to work in conjunction with your Spirit, to just be more like you, to continue to be used by you in other people's lives. I pray, God, that our life would be such a great representative of you that during our hardest times, others are like, oh, look at the hope they have. I need that. God, as we finish up our time together with some additional discussion, I pray that you would be glorified and that our conversation would just help us to grow more in love with you, since you